You know what I think about these histories that we do on a DVD? It makes me think of what Winston Churchill said. Churchill said, "History will be very kind to me because I intend to write it." And so I think all of this talk about years after when a movie was made, who knows what we remember, what we don't remember, but I'll try to give you some semblance of what at least I believe to be the truth. It might have more to do with what I wish were the truth. I don't know.
This year's Miss Bonnie Parker. I'm Clyde Barry. We rob banks.
This here's a stick-up.
Next time I'll aim a little lower.
Whoa! We're gonna have ourselves a time, boy! We got $1.98 and you're laughing.
I had been the art director of Esquire magazine for about 6 or 7 years. And I was looking around for something else to do. And David Newman was a young editor at Esquire, and we were by chance reading the same book. It was a book by John Toland called The Dillinger Days, and in it there was a footnote about Bonnie and Clyde, and it said not only were they outlaws, they were outcasts, and that caught our imagination. Now, I had grown up in Texas, and I'd grown up with all these stories about Bonnie and Clyde, and I began to tell David some of the stories about them, and we decided to write a film about Bonnie and Clyde. At the time that David and I were working at Esquire, and when we were talking about films, there were an enormous number of films coming out of Europe, but especially a group of filmmakers in France. They operated on the title New Wave directors, and the ones that influenced us the most were Francois Truffaut and the director Jean-Luc Godard. And we went to Texas, and we talked to people, and we came back to New York, and we wrote the screenplay. And we sent it to Truffaut, and Truffaut said that he had committed to doing Fahrenheit 451. And we were disappointed that it wasn't Truffaut.
I went to Paris to talk to Truffaut about maybe doing a movie about Edith Piaf, and he wasn't interested in that. But we had lunch, and he told me about Bob Benton and David Newman, who had done this script about Bonnie and Clyde, and said I really should get in touch with him. And so I called Bob Benton when I went back to New York.
And one Saturday morning the phone rang, and it was Warren. And he said that he'd had lunch with Truffaut, and Truffaut had said he should look at this screenplay. And I thought, okay, well, I said, tell me your hotel, I'll drop off the screenplay. And he said, no, I'll come by and pick it up. And my wife was in blue jeans and a shirt and her hair in curlers, and the doorbell rang 15 minutes later, and there was Warren Beatty. It was 2 weeks before she'd speak to me again. He read it, he wanted to do it, he wanted to buy it.
You know, whenever I come across a piece of material, I never see myself in it, because that's not me. And when I first had read the script, I kind of saw Bob Dylan, who I kind of knew, in it. And I went through all kinds of ramifications, and then eventually began to face the music of playing the part.
When he did buy it, we had meetings about who should direct it, and we urged Warren to go back to Truffaut. But he said something very smart. He said, you've written a French screenplay, you need an American director. And that was a very, very good argument, very persuasive.
I had made a picture with Arthur Penn. We had made a movie called Mickey 1, but on Bonnie and Clyde, I went to Arthur first, he turned me down, and then I was turned down by 10 or 12 other directors. I offered it to George Stevens, I offered it to Willie Wyler, I offered it to a whole slew of people. And they were kind of curious about it, but didn't want to do it.
One after another turned it down. They said, well, the characters are not sympathetic. You don't like them. I don't see the point in it. It's violence, it's gratuitous, all kinds of things.
And then I came back to Arthur, and I said, you know, you should come back and make another movie. And then this time he decided to do it.
I worried because I was afraid it was just going to be a gangster story. But when I finally said yes, it meant I would go to work with Benton and Newman on the sort of perceiving it. And so there were things that we changed rather radically. There was a sort of ménage à trois in the original story. The C.W. Moss character was a hulking sort of football type, and I thought that was way too sophisticated for the kind of story I thought we should tell.
When Dave and I first wrote
visita mi
it, Clyde
canal.
was bisexual. And when Warren came that morning to get the script, after I calmed my wife down, he called and he said, I started reading, I'm 20 pages into it, I want to do it. I said, Warren, wait till you're at page 47. And because I said, that's non-negotiable. And Warren called back an hour or so and he said, okay, I read it, I know what you're talking about, I still want to do it. I said, okay.
From the very beginning, Arthur wanted to take the homosexual aspect out of it. And I took discreet pains to not have too much of an opinion on that. It was the mid-'60s, and I thought, it's fine.
Warren never said a word about it. But Arthur came to us and said, I want you to consider changing the bisexuality. And we got sort of uneasy about that. And he said, I'm giving you two reasons. One is,
To cast it, Warren had very different ideas, and he went to numerous women out there and searched for somebody.
I started out doing photography and interviews of filmmakers and putting together a little magazine. And one day a press agent who had been helpful arranging an interview with Henry Fonda, he called me up and asked me to do him a favor. He had a new client, an actress, and he wanted to know if I would take pictures of her. And her name was Faye Dunaway. And as we worked together in the afternoon, she just came to life through the camera. And I had a great time with her, and we ended up spending longer than we should have. And she said she had to, race back to have this meeting with an actor-producer. The next day, the telephone rings, and it's Warren Beatty, actor-producer. And he says, I hear you took pictures of Faye Dunaway yesterday. I said, yeah. And he said, what did you think? And I told him that they were good. And he said, how would you like to show them to me and to Arthur Penn? I said, well, I'd love to do that. He said, well, why don't you come on over? We're talking about her right now. So I took my slide projector, my boxes of slides. I threw an old sheet, king-size sheet in the car, and drove down to the Beverly Wilshire, went up to Warren's room and went through the slides, and they looked and they talked, and sometime later he said that Warner Brothers would buy the pictures from me. He wanted me to get something out of this. And I said, I appreciated that, but what I'd really like would be when they made the movie, if he would send me a ticket to come down to Texas and watch. And I went down to Texas. So it was a fabulous learning opportunity for me, for which I will always be grateful to Warren.
Actually, because I knew more about them than anybody in the movie wanted me to know, or anybody else to know, because, it wasn't really realistic about them. It took off from them.
What we would do is we would shoot the day, and then that night get together in the motel and rehearse the next day's shooting. Well, as you encountered new material, there was question from everybody. How are we going to do this? What am I doing here? And Warren and I, not unusually, had somewhat different fixes on the scene.
I said I wanted to have one little provision. I said I would like to have an argument with you every day. If we don't have anything to argue about, let's find something to argue about. And then, we'll wind up at the end of the argument. We'll do what the director says. You're the director, and we'll do that. But I have the right to beat you up in a kind way. And he thought that was a good idea.
Bob Chown once said, whoever gets tired of arguing first loses, or discussing, fighting for their point or their point of view or something.
Fight's not a good word, but fight was the word that I had as an actor watching them. But obviously they were involved in some heavy, professional, collaborative decision-making.
We'd all be sitting in that car, me, Faye, Estelle, and Jean. And Warren would be talking to Arthur, like for hours, how the scene should be done. We'd be out in that field, and every scene, they'd do that, and we'd be sitting in the car.
aquí tus trailers, visita mi canal.
Warren just really wrote a whole new chapter in the book of Hollywood, you know. I once said to him, I said, gee, you know, I never realized it, but you were actually the first actor-producer, weren't you? For the moment, forgetting Charlie Chaplin and people like that, you know? And he said, no, but I was the best. And he was in so many.
Felt just a little bit insulted by the movie business before they went into it. I can't think of an exception, actually. Everybody had something they knew they could do better, and they all showed up and did it. And I've been so lucky from the beginning in relation to the people that I've been able to work with.